All right, so in this one, we are going to update our get read time function, and then we are going to create a actual field for each post for this get read time stuff. So one of the things you might be wondering is, why do we go into seconds? I just wanted to show you that you could do seconds. There's actually no reason to do seconds other than that you could do it and just doing some little math. Realistically, all you have to do is the minutes. You have to just calculate the minutes based on the count. So based on how many are actually in there and then how many you can read. So that's really what we want to do. And instead of using seconds, so I'm just going to comment this out completely, we are going to just go off of the minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste it below, and now just say minutes equals to read time minute. So we're going to show you how to do it the wrong way first, and then we're going to correct it. So I'm going to get rid of this str stuff here. And then there is one more thing that I want to do is I want to round this up to the nearest whole number. So the nearest minute, basically. So this is count per minute, right? Then what we can do then is we can import the math module. So math as in a Python math module. And if we just did math.ceil, as in ceiling, this is going to round this up. If you wanted to round it down, you could say floor. I'm going to round it up just because we are just going to assume that they're even slower. So if it says that it's a 10-minute read and it actually is a 7-minute read, cool. It just prepares the people that are a little bit slower at reading versus the ones that are fast, right? So if you're fast at reading, you're probably going to ignore that time anyway. So there we go. We've got this, and now it gives us an idea of what this read time is going to be in a time stamp, right? It's going to be an actual time object itself. So we'll see what that does in just a moment. Inside of our view post, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this get read time in here. We actually don't need this inside of our views any longer. So I'm going to just get rid of that. All right, and now what we want to do is actually put it inside of our models for our post. So the model for post in here, we actually are going to make a new field in here right below publish, and we're going to say read time equals to models.time field. And we'll say auto null equals to true and blank equals to true. The time field, you can use the same things as date and time, but by default, the auto now add as well as auto now is off. So basically we are setting these on our own. All right, so we've got a read time model now here. So let's go ahead and put this into the database. We'll do python manage.py, make migrations, and then python manage.py migrate. And we're going to run the server. Cool. So now that we've got this read time here, this is going to be auto-generated for us. And we want to do it in the pre-save receiver, right? So right before it's saved, we're just going to calculate it. And I'll say if instance.content. So I want to make sure that I have content actually in there. By default, I will have content, right? So content is required. It's a required field. But in my saver, pre-save receiver saver, I want to make sure that I'm not assuming that. Like, you don't always want to assume that everything's going to work out perfectly. In this case, I'm just thinking ahead of any potential issues if for some reason later I decide this is no longer a required field. That's kind of the reasoning there. Now what I want to do is get the read time. So I have to figure out how to do this. And of course it's from the utility function. So that's the first thing I want to do is from.utils import get read time. And just like what we did before is we're going to get the read time of something. So what I want to do is say HTML string equals to instance.get markdown. And that again will render a HTML string for us. So then the read time will just be equal to get read time of the HTML string. And we want to set that read time into our instance read time. So instance.readTime equals to read time. And of course, this is a variable where this is the field. So if that was confusing at all, we could just say var just to make sure that those two things aren't confusing. So this actually sets that read time for us. So let's go ahead and see what this does on our server. So make sure the server is running, and we'll go into our project. Oh, and of course, the time field is actually in the model field reference if you needed to look up any other things there. So back into our model, we're going to go ahead and go to edit and just hit create post or save. But we get this error, this type error, expected string or buffer. And that has everything to do with what we returned back from this get read time. So in our original utility function, we returned a string back. In this case, we're returning a timestamp back, or a date time object back, which is not what we want, or at least it's not what the field wants. So this is where, trying different things out is really important here, but it's actually expecting the string. So if for some reason you needed to actually return a time object back, this is what you would use. If you want to return something that's ready for the field, you just put it into a string, and that's what comes back. So let's try that again. I'll just hit refresh, hit continue, and this time it actually worked. If I go into the post admin itself, I now see that my read time is 2 minutes. If I just add a little bit more content into the field, I see that it changes to being 11 minutes, right? So I added a ton of content in here, and now it's at 11 minutes of read time. So looking back at the post, this is a lot longer, right? So this is essentially what it's emulating what 11 minutes of read time would be. Granted, this is just a list, but reading 600 things in a list might take around 11 minutes. It's really hard to say exactly, but if you were reading an actual paragraph and like sentences and all that, it's probably actually 11 minutes, where something like this, it might not be 11 minutes because it doesn't flow like normal English would. So now what we can do is actually show this onto our post inside of the object itself. So we go into our template, post detail, and we can say the instance.time. We can just say read time and put it right here and say read time and instance dot read time, and close off the paragraph tag here, and we see read time in there. We actually probably it's saying 2:11 a.m. It's not actually giving us the correct time because it's going off of some sort of time. It's not saying minutes, so we need to actually change this being into minutes, and we do that using built-in template tags. So if you go into the date built-in template tag, you can actually just scroll down to the lowercase I, and we see minutes here. So if we go into Sublime Text, back into this, we just use the template tag of time, and we can use time or date, and I'll just use I. And then if I come back in here and refresh, it'll say 11, and then we just add minutes. Refresh in here, and there we go. So we've got read time of 11 minutes. Cool. So that's actually showing us a read time, and that is kind of nice. It's something that having a blog might be really important, especially if you have a really long blog. I know we jumped a little bit, but before we finish, I wanted to show you how to actually see this rendered out using lorem ipsum text, which is basically placeholder text. So if you go to lipsum.com, you can get some placeholder text and just put it in as your post. So it looks a little bit more like an actual blog post would look like. But the main thing here is actually the read time if it's less than a multiple minutes, right? So if it's less than 2 minutes, it could say 1 minute, but what we really want to see is it's saying the number of minutes being correct. So if it's less than 1 minute, we'll say less. And then what we'll also do is if it's between 0 and 9 minutes, we want to just say something along those lines too. So anything beyond 10 minutes, we'll just render it out as 10 minutes for a very specific reason. So let's go ahead and actually render out this content again. And I'm going to get rid of some of that lorem and some text. And what we see here is a minute. So if I refresh, now it's showing me less than a minute. So how did I do that exactly? Well, I created this if statement. So if the time is less than the string of 1, so if we render that time that we just did less than a string of 1, I'll say it's less than 1 minute. But if it's 2 minutes, what do we do? So let's go ahead and come in here, and I'm just going to copy these words a couple times, or these paragraphs a couple times, hit save and continue, and now we've got 2 minutes. If I refresh in here, and now it says 0:2 minutes. That's not necessarily ideal as far as the first item or that first number, because anything beyond 10 minutes, then it's going to be okay. So what we could do is just say that pretty much the same sort of if statement in here, and just do elif less than or equal to 10 minutes, then, less than 10 minutes, we will then say this is less than 10 minutes. refreshing here, and now it's showing that. So this is, again, not the perfect solution. We could get it to a whole nother level as far as getting this working exactly the way we want. But in our case, we want finished is better than perfect. Now, what would you actually realistically do if you were going to be doing this? You would probably rethink how we actually use the field that we want. So the field itself, looking in the models, we might want to just use an integer field here and just assume minutes. We could do that. We could just assume that it's going to be minutes. But this, again, is going to be based on what your time is going to be, what you really want it to be. In our case, I want to assume that it's just going to be in minutes. So I'm going to use an integer field and get rid of that time field. And I'll say default equals to 0. So we're going to save that in just a second. And then the time itself, we no longer need to have the utility function work the way it does. All we have to do is return that read time in minutes. So now it's an integer, or it's not an integer yet because we rounded it up. We're just going to turn this into an integer with int. So it's going to round up to the nearest integer, and then this is going to return an integer. And then we go back into our models. And now get read time is now an integer, and it's going to work just fine as far as everything else is concerned. So let's go ahead and run the migrations here, and we'll do python manage.py, make migrations, and then python manage.py migrate. Good. We'll run the server. We will refresh, go into our edit, create post, saying less than a minute. So it's not necessarily reading it correctly. So let's go back into post detail. And now what I can just do is grab this instance minute stuff and get rid of these if statements, get rid of the filter, come back in here, refresh, and now it says 2 minutes. So the if statement here would be if instance dot read time is less than or equal to 1, then we'll just say less than 1 minute. Spelling, there we go. And finally, and if. Okay, so let's edit that again. Make it less than 1 minute, and now it shows us less than 1 minute. So it's definitely closer to what we wanted. There is other things that you can do in here as far as making that a little bit more dynamic using the time that we just did. But I wanted to show you 2 different ways on how you could actually accomplish the exact same thing using the same function, right? So you could totally change it back to what it was if you really want to be super specific, which in some cases you might want to be. You might want to just go off of very much time. And then using the filters to display it in a way that you might want. But for us, using just minutes is just fine. But again, it's about thinking through the problem that you might need and how you might want to implement this. As far as getting something done and ready for production, what we really would have done is just skip this entire time stuff and not even show you. But we wanted to show you it, and also we wanted to show you about the template filters, a little bit more of that stuff too, so you can see those things in action too, and how you can actually use them to use if statements like what we just showed. All right, so if you have any questions on this, let us know. I will actually leave this other instance time stuff inside of here, just so you have some sort of reference point for a comment of this. And I'm just going to comment. I'm just going to do HTML commenting to comment that out. It shouldn't render either way, but that is just so you have a reference for the other one on how we actually went about doing that. Okay, so if you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.